This production tip is brought to you by TCMedia.
Hi there, this is Fletcher at Thurston Community Media, and I want to tell you that keyframes in Final Cut are awesome. They are, in essence, a way of controlling parameters automatically over time in your Final Cut project. What we're going to look at today is something called audio ducking, and I'll explain as I demonstrate, but I want to warn you, at the end of the tutorial, I'm going to do something pretty irritating. I'm going to show you a really quick way to do the same thing we're about to spend a few minutes doing using keyframes. This is not because I'm a joker, although I'll admit I am a little bit. It's because I think this is a good way to demonstrate how keyframes work. So let's jump into the project. Okay, in this project we have some video footage from a train in Norway. Beneath that in our timeline we have a music track, and beneath the music track we have a few chunks of voiceover audio. Now, I want to zoom in on my timeline just a bit so we can get a closer look at this first voiceover chunk. So Command plus on my keyboard zooms the timeline in. That looks good. Now I want to play the first 10 seconds or so of the project so we can see and hear the puzzle that we need to solve using keyframes. Here we go.
Our travelers found themselves on a train from Oslo to Lillehammer.
Okay, it's obvious we need to turn the music down when the voiceover begins and turn it back up when the voiceover ends. And we can do that using keyframes. So, to begin, I want to turn snapping on, which I usually leave off because I find it a little irritating, but for this project I'm going to turn it on. I can use either the N key on my keyboard or just click this snappy little icon here. The reason I want to turn it on is it'll help me with playhead placement. So if I click, I want the playhead to go right at the start of this first voiceover chunk. So if I click in the vicinity of that voiceover chunk, it's going to snap right to the start of it because I have snapping turned on. And the next step is I want to select the music track. Notice on any audio track in Final Cut, in the timeline, you'll see a line running down the middle. That is the volume line for the track, and that's where we're going to place our keyframes. And this is how we do it. We go to the inspector, having the music track selected, go to the inspector. At the top of the inspector there's a volume slider. Now when you hover over the volume slider, a little diamond appears to the right that says Add a Keyframe. Now Final Cut has this habit of leaving some controls in the inspector hidden until you hover over them and then they appear. That's a little irritating at first, but once you know that you need to look for things in the inspector by hovering, you get used to the idea. So, I have the music track selected, I have my playhead where I want my first keyframe to go. I'm going to click that diamond in the volume slider in the inspector. It's going to turn yellow and a keyframe appears on the music track where I have my playhead. Now I want to move my playhead 15 frames backwards in the project toward the beginning of the project. So I'm going to use my arrow key on the keyboard to do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 is a kind of a random number for this, but anyway. This is where I want my second keyframe to go. The music track is still selected, that's important. I'm going to go to the volume slider of the inspector and click the diamond again. There's a new keyframe that's now added. Now I want to go to the end of this voiceover chunk, so I'm going to click near it, and because snapping is turned on, it snaps there. The music track is still selected. I go to the inspector, the volume slider, click another keyframe. There we go. Now I want to go 15 frames forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And that's where I'll add the final of 4 keyframes. And in a minute you're going to see why we need 4 to do this. Okay. So what I've effectively done here is I've isolated a segment of the volume line associated with the music track on a sort of island between keyframes. And notice I get this 4-directional icon when I hover right over that line. This indicates that I can pull down, click and pull down, drag downward right on that segment of the volume line and release it when I get down in the 20s or so, minus 20 something. It's a little hard to control sometimes, but there we go. What you'll notice is I've turned the volume down with a sort of ramp at each end, and that's exactly what I need to duck the audio down when the voiceover comes in. Let's listen back and see what we got.
Our travelers found themselves on a train from Oslo to Lillehammer.
Okay, that's awesome. That's exactly what we want. Now I want to point out a couple of things about selecting keyframes in the timeline. Once you've got these diamonds appearing on an audio track, you can single click them to select. They'll turn golden. You can also go up to the inspector where you've applied these keyframes, and you'll notice there's a little diamond or a triangle pointed backwards in this case. I can click that and it'll notice the playhead starts to jump to the previous keyframe, then to the previous keyframe. Now I've got two little arrows, so I can go backwards or forwards exactly to the keyframes, back to the other keyframe. So I can single click them in the timeline to select them. I can shift click to select multiples of them. So I could select both of those and move the ramp where I wanted to. So you can select keyframes on audio tracks in the timeline. That's an important thing to point out. Now, I promised I would show you a quick way to do this, so let's do that right now. I'm going to start by hitting Command-Z a few times to get rid of these keyframes and start again. Command-Z, of course, is our best friend in Final Cut. It undoes the last thing we did, and you can use Command-Z a bunch of times if you need to back up to reach a point where you made a mistake or you just want to undo a bunch of steps. Command-Z is your friend. Okay, here's the quick way to do it. With the music track selected, I'm going to go to my toolbox and I'm going to select Range Selection Tool. I'm going to then hover over the music track and I'm just going to drag with that range selection tool. Hello? There it is. Drag with the range selection tool above where the voiceover is, and I've selected an area. Now I can just drag downward on that line segment in the volume of the music track, and it does the same exact thing. Let me get my select tool back, that I did the long way a minute ago with adding keyframes individually. It added 4 keyframes and it ramped down the volume at that point. So there's a quick way to do ducking. Now, before we end this tutorial, I want to tell you something about keyframes that's going to blow your mind, I hope. And that is, you can use keyframes for many, many parameters in Final Cut to control behavior of those parameters over time automatically. So that means you can apply keyframes to opacity, to position, to scale, rotation, even to color and saturation and exposure, and effects parameters. If you add effects, you can look for ways to add keyframes to the different parameters of those effects to control them over time. So for example, if you want text to fly in on the screen and then stop and maybe disappear gradually over time, you can apply keyframes to the position parameters, to the opacity parameters. Just keep in mind that you need to think in terms of ramping. You need a keyframe for your start position. You need a keyframe for when you want the parameter to begin changing. You need a keyframe for when you want the parameter to end changing. So think in terms of multiple keyframes to affect position, scale, opacity, and all these other things. You'll get the idea. Just go out there and play with keyframes, and I know you're going to love them. That's it for now.
This production tip is brought to you by TCMedia, where our community brings local media to life for Thurston County since 1984. Visit tcmedia.org for orientation and class schedules, video on demand, and information on how we can help you become a media producer.